So from 1965 to 1974, Amicus Productions made a bunch of horror anthology films over in Britain, also called portmanteau films, and I just got done with the review series reviewing all of them on this channel in depth, so now it's time to rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. So welcome to the Cobwebs channel, everyone. My name is Daniel. Thank you so much for dropping by, and yeah, I'm going to be ranking all 7 Amicus anthologies, and if you're thinking there's actually more than 7, there's actually a few movies that were made around this time period that are very similar and even have some similar people involved that people think are Amicus anthologies, but they're actually not because they're not produced by the company of Amicus. And as I go, I'm also going to be ranking these by the wraparound and by the Peter Cushing performance because he's just such a staple for these movies. Is that confusing? Okay, let's jump in. It'll make sense, I promise. So let's jump in with number 7, which is The Vault of Horror from 1973. So this movie opens up with a bunch of guys going down an elevator and coming into a mysterious dining room. They don't know why they're there, and they sit down and tell each other about some scary dreams that they've all had. And that leads us into the 5 scary stories that we're going to watch in this movie. Now, ranking this one at the bottom, I think is kind of controversial because a lot of people love this movie and I just don't. I put this at the bottom because I think it's the only one of these movies that doesn't have a big standout segment. There's no great segment in this movie that really makes it stand out for me. Now, my favorite one is about a middle-aged couple who just gets married and discovers they have trouble getting along because the main guy is a super neat freak.
3 marks, spaghetti sauce. No spaghetti sauce. You haven't even bothered.
And he drives his wife to a very murderous place. And that one is pretty fun, kind of funny. I really like the performances in that one, including from Glennis Johns, who was the mom in Mary Poppins. That one's my favorite, but even that one isn't great. It's just a good segment. And some of the segments in here I just really don't like. There's one about a guy who goes to India to learn a new magic trick, and there's like a living scary rope that attacks him, and that's not very interesting. There's another one where a guy uses voodoo to paint his enemies and get revenge by massacring the paintings, and I just find that very standard. There's some okay stuff in here, and it's not a bad movie, it's just very mediocre. So ranking this by the wraparound, I'm also going to put this one at the bottom at number 7. A wraparound is what ties all of the scary stories together, and I think this one is the most lazy. It's just guys who walk into a room and tell each other their scary dream, and there's very little else to it than that. This is actually based on the EC Comics Vault of Horror. Well, supposedly, the stories aren't actually from the Vault of Horror comics, but it's supposed to be, and there is a vault keeper in the Vault of Horror comics that you don't get in this one, so I think this is the lamest wraparound. And ranking by the Peter Cushing performance, it's also going at the bottom because Peter Cushing isn't in this one. This is the only movie of the bunch with no Peter Cushing, so by default, it's got to go at the bottom. So, I don't know, no Peter Cushing, you get last place. And I've got this movie in the Scream Factory double pack with Tales from the Crypt, but we'll get to that one later. So at number 6, we've got Torture Garden from 1967. So this is the second Amicus anthology, and this one opens up with a bunch of people who are at a carnival, and they meet Dr. Diablo, who brings them into his carnival attraction where he's going to tell their future through this mannequin that supposedly can give them visions of their future and also give them visions of the true evil that's in their heart. So we get 4 segments in this movie, and all of them are about the evil in the heart of each of the characters. Now, I think this is the most popular choice for last place. It's not a great movie. The way I described it in my review is it's half bad and half really good because I really don't like the first 2 segments. In fact, I think this movie has my least favorite Amicus segment, which is Terror Over Hollywood, in which a young woman goes to Hollywood to become a famous actress, and she discovers the real reason that the Hollywood stars are able to seem eternal and all of that, and it's really lame. But I do really like the last 2 segments, and this one can't be last place because it does have a great standout segment, which is Jack Palance and Peter Cushing as Edgar Allan Poe super fans who are showing each other their Poe collection, and it goes to some supernatural places at the end, some very meta Edgar Allan Poe kind of stuff. That's really cool. So I love that segment. And there's also one about a possessed piano that I think is pretty cool. So all in all, it's a 50-50 experience, but good enough to not get last place. So ranking this by the wraparound, I'm also going to put it at number 6. I promise this isn't always going to be quite so consistent. So Burgess Meredith plays Dr. Diablo, and I just don't think he creates an interesting character. He's just trying to be a spooky guy, and I just don't think it works that well. And he's not even the one giving the visions. It's all coming from a mannequin, which I think is a weird choice. But I do like how the actress who plays the mannequin pops up for a cameo in all the segments. So that's kind of a cool thing to look out for. And ranking this by the Peter Cushing performance, I'm going to put it at number 5. I do really like Peter Cushing as an Edgar Allan Poe super fan, but that segment really belongs to Jack Palance, who is the other one, the true star of that segment. And Jack Palance just steals this show. He chews up the scenery. I think he's so fun in that. And Cushing is good too, but it's Jack Palance's show. So number 5 is where we're putting it. I've got this on this Indicator Blu-ray. Happy to have it in my collection. At number 5, we've got Dr. Terror's House of Horrors from 1965. The first one of these movies produced. And with this film, we kick off the part of the list where I really like all of these movies. And I really do enjoy this one. But as the first in the series, it does feel a little creaky. It feels like they are working out the kinks of how these movies are going to go. But it opens up with Peter Cushing as some kind of a medium, Dr. Terror, and he gets onto a train. He's at a train car with 5 other guys, and he tells all of their fortunes with tarot cards. And all of their fortunes become the scary stories in here, and none of these segments are terrible. There's one about a creeping vine, a living vine that lives on this guy's house that kills people. That's not very good. It's very slight, not terribly interesting, but everything else is pretty good. And it does have one segment that I think is fantastic, one of my favorites in this whole series, which is about Christopher Lee as a snooty art critic who is haunted by a disembodied hand that is trying to murder him. It's so fun, and I love Christopher Lee in this movie. He's fantastic. And there's just some really fun stuff in here. Like there's even one with Donald Sutherland where he marries a vampire. Now, ranking this by wraparound, I'm actually going to put this at number 1. I love the wraparound story in this. I mean, Peter Cushing as Dr. Terror is fantastic. He really gets to create a character here, put on an interesting voice. I love the tarot cards and how he uses those to tell all of their fortunes. And it's got the best stinger at the end. I love how this one ends. Fantastic. Now, ranking this by Peter Cushing performance, I'm going to put this at number 2. It's not quite the best Peter Cushing performance of the bunch, but it's great. I just love him as Dr. Terror. So I have this movie on this Vinegar Syndrome 4K. It looks absolutely stunning. I mean, these movies have never looked better. So I really hope that more of these get released on 4K soon. The next two are really close, really hard to rank, but at number 4, I'm going to put Asylum, which opens up with a guy who comes to a mental asylum to interview for a job to be one of the doctors, and he finds out that the head doctor of this asylum has now gone crazy himself and is now a patient. And the guy who's now running the place says, hey, if you can go talk to all the patients and figure out who is Dr. Stein, which of them used to be the head physician of this asylum, then you can get the job. So what this movie is he interviews different patients, he finds out how they ended up there, and that gives us our scary stories. Now, the structure of this one's pretty interesting because it's got 3 traditional segments that play out the way you would expect, but then the last segment, really, the wraparound becomes the final segment, which is very interesting. It's the only one of these movies like this, and I really like this movie. It's only got one segment I don't really care for, which is called Lucy Comes to Stay. It's got Britt Eklund from The Wicker Man, which is cool. It's just got an extremely obvious twist, and the whole segment's really building up to that. But every other segment in here is really good. The standout for me is The Weird Tailor, which is about a tailor who is tasked to make a very unusual suit by a mysterious client, Peter Cushing. And it leads to some like reviving the dead or even reviving other things kind of places. That's really cool. I love that segment. And I really enjoy the final quote unquote segment that the wraparound becomes, including Herbert Lom bringing some robot dolls to life through sheer consciousness. That's just so crazy. And I really enjoy it.
But I would walk 500 miles an hour.
Now, ranking this movie by wraparound, I'm actually going to put it at number 2. I just think the idea of taking place in an asylum and interviewing all of the different patients is a fantastic idea for an anthology movie. Really like it. And I just love how the wraparound kind of becomes a segment. I think that's really cool. And ranking this by Peter Cushing performance, I'm actually going to put it at number 3 because this is one of the rare times that Peter Cushing gets to be kind of creepy. He's kind of one of the creepiest elements of the movie. His performance is just a little bit off in just the right way. He's just fantastic in this. So I've got a Blu-ray from Severin right here. Very cool stuff. At number 3, we've got From Beyond the Grave from 1974. This is the last film in the series, and this one opens up with Peter Cushing once again as an antique shop owner, and David Warner comes in and wants to buy a very mysterious mirror, brings it home, and the mirror turns out to have some kind of a curse on it. And what the movie turns out to be is people go to this antique shop, something happens there, and it supposedly spurns the segment that's going to come. This one's got 4 segments, and they're all good. There's only one segment that I don't super care for. It's the last one. It's called The Door, in which this guy buys a door at the antique shop, and it turns out to be a portal into some kind of other world. It's very reminiscent of the first segment, which is about a mirror bought in the antique shop that turns out to be some kind of portal. They're a little bit too close, and I think the mirror one is definitely much better. I mean, for one thing, it stars David Warner, and he's fantastic, and it's so cool to see him in this movie. You've also got this great segment with Donald Pleasance about this guy who's like this unhappily married office drone who becomes friends with Donald Pleasance and his daughter and gets drawn into their very creepy world and their very bad intentions. The segments in here are really, really good. I really enjoy this movie. Now, if we're going to rank this based on the wraparound, I'm also going to put this one at number 3. Now, I really like Peter Cushing as this antique shop owner. The atmosphere of this antique shop is really good. The only thing I don't love about this wraparound is I do feel like it's inconsistent, because the first segment and the last segment are both about somebody getting some kind of a cursed object at the antique shop, and that sets off the segment to come. And the middle 2 segments are not. The middle 2 segments just seem to be about somebody doing something dishonest in the antique shop, and I guess they end up being sort of unlucky, I guess, because they do something dishonest. But I just think that's inconsistent. Like, for one thing, I think the cursed object in the antique shop is a much better idea, and considering 2 of the segments do that, and then 2 of them, it's just like, they just do something dishonest, and I guess they get supernaturally punished for it. That doesn't even quite work, because in the second segment in the movie, he goes to the antique shop like halfway through the segment, so the events of the are already in motion. Anyway, but I do really like this antique shop, and I do really like Peter Cushing in it, and that's why for a Cushing ranking, I'm going to put this at number 4. The role of this antique shop owner doesn't require a lot from him, but he's still really good, and I just love it when he sees somebody do something dishonest, and he's just like, shouldn't have done that. Cushing, he's a pro. He's always doing a great job. I have this one on a Warner Archive Blu-ray, and I just love the cover of that. So cool. At number 2, Tales from the Crypt from 1972. So this one is supposedly based on the Tales from the Crypt EC comics, and it opens up with a bunch of people going into a crypt and meeting a crypt keeper who's played by Ralph Richardson, and he tells the future of all 5 people in there. So we get 5 segments, and they're almost all fantastic. I mean, I love the first one, which is about Joan Collins as a woman who murders her husband. And if that wasn't enough, then an escaped psychopath dressed up like Santa Claus comes to kill her, break into her house and kill her on Christmas Eve. It's great Christmas horror, a Christmas slasher, well before Christmas slashers would become popular later on in the 70s and 80s. There's only one segment that's not great, which is about a guy leaving his wife, getting into a car accident, and possibly becoming the Walking Dead, but even that one's like fine. Like, pretty much all the segments here are really, really strong. And one interesting thing about the structure of it is it rushes through 4 segments in about an hour and then takes the rest of the runtime on the final segment called Blind Alleys, which is about a horrible man who takes over a home for the blind and treats the people there terribly, and they get their revenge. Man, this is a great movie. Absolutely love it. But for ranking the wraparound, I'm actually going to put this down at number 4 because I don't love Ralph Richardson as the Crypt Keeper. I would have liked something a little bit more monstrous, creepy. It's hard not to compare him to the Crypt Keeper from the 1990s, right?
Now that's entertainment.
And the fact that they just wander into this crypt, are told their fortunes, it's very standard. It works, it's good, but it's not spectacular. But ranking it on Peter Cushing performance, it's getting number 1. Because this Peter Cushing segment in which he plays an elderly man, a kind elderly man, who gets his life ruined by this rich, snobby brat across the street just because he doesn't like looking at his quote-unquote eyesore of a house, is so sympathetic. I love Cushing's performance. He's really created a character here, something very unique in his career, something so sympathetic. And when we get to the ending where he becomes this zombie, I mean, it's some of the best makeup you're going to see in any classic horror film. It looks so good. The imagery is just top notch. So Cushing's performance is amazing in that. That segment is amazing. I mean, it's pretty close to be my favorite segment in this entire series, if it isn't number one. But I've got this one also in the Scream Factory double pack with the Vault of Horror. It's just such a fantastic movie. But my number one is The House That Dripped Blood from 1971. So this one is about a police inspector who comes to a house because of the disappearance of that tenant there. And he's told the story by both a realtor and a local policeman there about how several different tenants in this mysterious, creepy house have all disappeared. And there we get 4 different segments all about people in this house. And the reason this one gets number one for me is I just think it's the most consistent. Like I said, 4 segments, they're all good. The first one is the least of them. It's starring Denholm Elliott as a horror writer who writes about a serial killer and it seems to come to life and terrorize him. And even that one's like solid. So if that's the worst segment in your movie, you're doing darn good. But there's some real standout stuff here, like Peter Cushing going to a mysterious wax museum. The final segment in the movie is so much fun about an actor who plays vampires in movies. Very much a Vincent Price or Christopher Lee type guy.
Dracula. The one with Bela Lugosi, of course, not this new fella.
Ingrid Pitt is in that one too. It's a really fun vampire comedy. This movie has got what might actually be my favorite segment in all these movies. It's neck and neck with that Peter Cushing one in Tales from the Crypt. And it's starring Christopher Lee as the father of a young girl who hires a governess, a nanny, to come take care of his kid. And it turns out there might be something really creepy going on in this house, possibly from Christopher Lee, but possibly from another source too. Don't quite want to spoil it, but that segment is amazing. I love the performance from Nairi Dawn Porter as this governess. I think she's so good, so sympathetic. And I think this has just got one of the creepiest endings of any of these segments. It's just fantastic. But for the wraparound, I'm actually going to put this one down at number 5. It's solid, but it's really quick. Like, you just get this inspector being told the stories of the different people in this house. It takes up very little time. So there's not a lot of time for you to really get latched into it. But I do like how it ends. It does have a good ending, kind of pulling in one of the segments into the reality of the wraparound. And ranking it on the Peter Cushing performance, it's actually going to go down at number 6. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because this is the most normal of all of Peter Cushing's performance. Just kind of standard. He's just playing a kind of lonely guy who retires, who goes to live in a small town and relax. He just doesn't get the chance to really stand out and do anything great. But that aside, I love this movie. I have it on Scream Factory Blu-ray. It's absolutely fantastic. And that's my list. So let me know your ranking of all of these movies down in the comments below. I would love to hear it. And if you want to hear more about these movies, check out this playlist right down here. That's all of the in-depth reviews I did on all of these movies. So check them out. Have fun. Give a like if you enjoyed this and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today. Have some fun, and I'll see you next time.